All right, thanks everybody for joining us today for our June 26th regular council meeting. And I'd just like to start by saying that respectfully acknowledging that we are gathering on the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. And we truly are grateful for being able to live, work, and play on this beautiful part of the world. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thanks, Mayor. And this is our quarterly announcement of the toxic drug crisis deaths in our community. The Courtenay Council would like to acknowledge the deaths of 14 Comox Valley community members in the period of January to April 2024 due to the unregulated toxic drug supply crisis, for a total of 191 deaths of Comox Valley community members since the public health emergency was first declared. Our hearts go out to their loved ones. And we just really want you to know that your lives matter and that council will continue to push for action and effective policy to stop these preventable and unnecessary deaths. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jolicoeur. Really appreciate that. And again, devastating news, especially for the families, friends. With that, we'll move into adoption of minutes. And we do have June 12th, 19th, and the special council meeting from the 19th, if we'd like to move all three at once. Thanks, Councillor Cole-Hamilton, Councillor Frisch. And are there any errors or omissions? And seeing no errors or omissions, we'll accept those minutes as presented unanimously. And we'll move into delegations. And I believe we have, I've got three names: Jessica Evans, Paul Myers, and Cassidy Vanderos. That sounds fairly close. So if you guys would like to approach the podium and just push the magic button on the microphone up there, and then yes, sir. Yeah, we can certainly vary the agenda if you'd like. Okay. We're kind of on island time here generally, so we try not to stress anybody out, but really appreciate you bringing your child here today. That's awesome. Right at the bottom of the microphone. That's the one.
It's flashing.
And now your microphone is live. So if you would like to introduce yourself, and then your 10 minutes will be starting.
Thank you. I not too many people put their shirts back on to be able to present, but the child is fed, so hopefully we can have some good quality time together. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. My name is Jessica Evans. This is my husband, Paul, and our little guy, Grand. I'm splitting my time with Cassidy, who's here, that we asked to join from Nickel Brothers. So I'm just here to tell you, hi, Courtenay resident, and why we feel that this is important. Our presence, I hope, helped show why this is important. We have almost no time. We don't have childcare. Kid's amazing. He's 14 months old. We each work part-time. Calls me dad. That's amazing. We each work part-time so that we can show up for the child full-time. But we carved out time for this to be able to talk to council. My husband has had many meetings with a variety of folks with city staff. Everyone's been responsive. They've wanted to email with us. They've wanted to meet with us to be able to explain this bylaw. Yeah, we feel that there's, I don't know, maybe it's an error, maybe it wasn't intended. I'm here to talk to you about the unintended side effect of the bylaw that's quoted in our letter, the 2023 version. In short, if you could roll it back to the 2020 version, that would be great. The 2020 version is very clear. There are steps for people like us to be able to follow. I got a house, I'm landing the house, I'm working with an engineer, I'm making the house safe, I'm living in the house. In our case, where we do have in detail in our letter, and we're happy to speak to that detail in the Q&A if you have any questions, we've exhausted our options to be able to stay in Courtenay, to be able to expand our house, to be able to grow our family, maybe even to be able to have the room to have another child. That's why you have an impassioned mother here talking to you. To be able to land a Nickel Brothers home, means that we would then be able to rent out our existing really cute 1945 rancher, 1 bedroom. We'd give them part of the yard. We'd be able to share a property and be amazing. I do want to say I'm not here to complain. I acknowledge my privilege of being a homeowner. I'm really proud that I worked so hard in the 2010s and got into the market when it was already, a little inflated. I have compassion for the people that recommended this bylaw. I feel that we've learned enough about the rationale about the bylaw that I can see why someone in a desk in a meeting room would say from point A to point B, this makes perfect sense. And we're going to make Courtenay safer and houses will be safer and yay. But I need you to know that this bylaw is actually prohibitive. We're doing decently. We're solid middle class. We're your Joe Public. We can't afford to bring in a house that is younger than 15 years old. And frankly, they're not on the market. It doesn't exist. The bylaw in question, I feel, disempowers the general public to be able to acquire a home. I call it adopting a house, a well-used, so not well-used, but probably a well-maintained home that we could then work with an engineer. We could be empowered. We could work with the city staff, like the 2020 bylaw had really clear steps for how we could land that house and be able to live in it and raise our family there. There is a little bit, I feel, maybe of like a not in my backyard sort of thing when we see that this is allowed in other jurisdictions. It's like, love that for you, Cumberland, like CVRD, go land your houses, good for you, it's great. And kind of I have to say, like, to be frank, because I'm comfortable here, I voted for each of you. So whenever we found out about the bylaw, I told Paul, I'm like, well, we're going to go talk to them. I'll talk to them. I feel comfortable. I know your names. You don't know me. I'm over familiar. So thank you for understanding that. We're not in the income bracket that can work within this bylaw. I'm not sure who is, but it's not, I believe, the general public or constituents such as ourselves. Also to speak very briefly, and I'm sure Cassidy will get into this, my personal concern about the waste that's generated. I walk 5 to 10 kilometers a day in Courtenay because that's where the baby sleeps. Pro tip, we've missed his nap to be here today, so we might not stay for too long after our Q&A. It's like we're building a culture where a little house it's the only thing the little house has done is it's in a pretty big yard. That house is leveled, a fourplex is developed, they're up for sale. I love the infill that's happening. I love like the sound of I can, how do I put that? I can share my property, I can share my land wealth. I have one house, I can add 3 dwellings, I can rent out, I can add to the rental market. I don't think we're going to see that. I really do feel that this is written in favor of developers. We wouldn't be able to afford a new building. And I do want to wrap up there and bring Cassidy up and just say the demolition of an existing home going into the landfill, the packaging, the waste of a new build. I really don't think this is what we meant to design. Thank you for your time. I'm going to pass it over to Cassidy, who I'm very grateful we were able to bring in. Thank you, Cassidy.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that. And we're just a little bit past the 50% mark, but we're just pulling up the PowerPoint PDF here. Yeah, sure.
All right. I'll probably go through it fairly quickly. You were also provided with a report that overlaps with some of the information. So I'll trust that anything that gets skipped, you can review. Can we actually go one slide above? Thank you. So I just wanted to start with some documentation that's been released by the federal and provincial governments recently. This is from a Ministry of Housing Building Code Technical Bulletin that was released in May or June of 2024, where they highlight home relocation as an important aspect of zero waste planning for BC municipalities. And if we can go to the next slide, thank you. And this was a study released by the federal government in 2023 as part of their building code update proposals. I know sometimes with relocated homes, people have concerns about safety of an older home. So one thing that the BCSMA requires is engineers reports, sorry, that's the BC Structural Movers Association, requires house movers to have is engineers reports, hazmat reports, and structural reports to ensure the structural soundness. And additionally, we can see in the study that the federal government released, I don't think they actually did the study, they just released it as part of their research. And I can provide a full version of that if anybody's interested, but they basically talk about how in many cases, older homes are actually more structurally sound than what we're building today. And that's because a lot of building techniques have been deemed outdated because they're no longer affordable, not because they weren't structural, not because they didn't have structural integrity. We've started building for fast and cheap rather than for long-term use. Next slide, please. Thank you. So essentially, we're kind of in this situation right now in BC where production emissions from construction are currently representing 40% of our global emissions, global production emissions. So we are demolishing homes to say, oh, we want better operational emissions. We want to reduce carbon through operational emissions. But every time we do that, we increase our production emissions for materials, and we also double the amount of embodied carbon in our communities, both in the landfill and in use. So we're kind of in this cycle right now where no home is able to actually outlive its carbon payback period. They're all being demolished ahead of time. So we're constantly going into a carbon deficit by building new, regardless of how green we build. Next slide, please. Thank you. And this is a wonderful graphic by Brenda Martins, who you may or may not have heard of. She's a really great lead certified building consultant, where she has been advocating that building nothing is actually the best position we can be in, is just reusing, and the things that we do are already in progress of being built should be being built for the long term. That's not entirely realistic, but either way, you get the point of the graphic. Next slide, please. Thank you. And the reason that that is the case, that building less is actually the way forward to zero carbon emissions or less carbon emissions, is because of embodied carbon, which a lot of people overlook when they think of building. So operational carbon is actually only this tiny, tiny little fraction of the carbon in a building. Most carbon emissions from a building, about 60%, are actually already created by the time the building is ready for occupancy. So all of that upfront carbon represents 60% of all of the building, and that's produced just through building it. It has nothing to do with using it, with how eco-friendly the electricity is, how insulated it is. That's just materials. Next slide, please.
And we're at only maybe a minute or two left, and I notice you're only about halfway through the slides, so.
We're going to get there. It's okay.
But there'll be questions after, just so you know.
Thank you. So this is just a graphic showing where we are currently on track for with our current steps we've been taking municipally in Canada, federally, provincially, et cetera. We are still going up in our carbon footprint. Whereas our target that we are legally bound to is obviously much lower. And part of that is because we are so keen on demolishing to build new rather than keeping what we have. Next slide, please. This is just an example of a couple of homes. It shows you how many trees were cut down to build that home, how many kilograms of waste will be created through its demolition, how much embodied carbon is in that home and will be released through demolition, and also the number of years left for that home to complete the carbon cycle. The average carbon cycle for a home is about 168 years, and also the cost that it would be to relocate that home rather than building a new one. Next slide, please. Same thing. I'm going to trust you guys can review that on your own. Thank you. And this is just a photo. Recently, we have had an outpouring of support from the Indigenous community. They've found that relocating homes is a lot cheaper and a lot faster than building new. So they're able to house members of their community a lot faster and on a much lower budget, which means they can house more people at once through relocating rather than building new. This is Jeremy Nickel, Glenn Lewis, and a gentleman from West Group, who I apologize, I don't remember his name, with the chief of Seashell Nation. 10 homes went to them just in the last month, and 4 homes went to another nation, I think last week, or they're going next week. So that's just cool, a cool little bonus impact. For recommendations, these are my recommendations. They were also included in the report. These were based on feedback and discussions with Lighthouse Sustainability Society and a little bit of back and forth as well with Zero Waste BC and as well as the BC Structural Movers Association. There are examples of some of these in place in the report through the example bylaws I gave you. I don't think there's any municipality currently that has all of them in place, but these are some of the things that through feedback we've discovered can streamline the permitting process and make it a bit easier, both for staff who are working on those permits and also for the people applying for them. And those are outlined further in the report I provided. So thank you
Excellent.
for allowing me to speak today.
All right, and you may want to stay there. There's likely to be some questions. And while I'm waiting for the question to start up, I do really like that comment. I don't know if you said rescue house, but that's what popped into my head. And really appreciate that, as well as the comments around circular economy. And Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks for the delegation, guys. I am just a little bit lost on your situation. You have a lot with a house on it.
Yeah, that's
and-
correct.
And you want to move that house?
No, we keep the existing house in the front and rent that out, and we would bring a new house into the back.
Okay, and have you found a new house, or you're looking somewhere?
There's a constantly circulating stock with Nickel Brothers that we're kind of waiting. We're kind of waiting on approval, obviously, before we start pulling the trigger.
I
on
got
that.
it. So your interest really is just to use like recycle a house versus build a new one?
Our primary interest is being able to afford to do this.
Yeah.
And this is the way to do it.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Excellent. And one of the things, just, when we do get a delegation, we generally don't make any decisions, but it will come back through staff, and we'll contemplate this at a further future meeting. And again, like having those square foot costs are pretty good. Maybe one question I have, now there's a whole bunch of lights, but I'll finish my one question. Is the average age of the houses that are being moved? Because I think what's being talked about here is 15 years is too tight, but just to get a sense of what's the average age of a house.
I don't have an overall average for you. Realistically, most of our homes come out of Metro Vancouver, and we're demolishing about 2,700 homes a year there. So there's a pretty wide range. I would say 15 years is rather tight. Personally, I also don't totally understand the 15-year timeline, just because that's going to change every year. So I'm not entirely sure on what the purpose of that was, and that's just me.
Right.
I haven't had a chance to have those
Versus
conversations.
actually
so I'm not
having
sure.
a certified expert say this house is movable or not.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
No, I appreciate that.
But
There-
I
there's a-
could find out an average if you'd like and get back to you on that.
Yeah, I don't think it's life and death, but we got lots of questions here, so maybe I'll pass it over to Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you, Mayor, and thanks, folks. I apologize for being a minute late today. So I have a question for staff, but I think I'll ask the question to you folks first. I know that you provided some examples of Seashell being one of them, jurisdictions that have a different bylaw. Are you able to, where all those bylaws didn't have any age of house in them, or was it sort of a mixed? I mean, I did read them, but I'm just wondering if you could just summarize a bit what the main differences were.
I'm not aware of another jurisdiction that has an age
Okay.
aspect to their bylaw. Most of them require like an engineer's report, hazmat report, basically so that, it's not up to the building inspector to say, yes, this house is safe or not. There's, a registered professional
Right.
who's saying, yes, this house is safe. And WCB has also approved all of those processes.
Right,
To ensure that anybody working on the building site is safe as well.
right.
Um,
So to the folks that are looking to do this, so you're not opposed to that kind of stuff, having an engineer's report. It's just
No,
mostly that
we
age
wanna-
of house.
We want to live in a safe house.
Absolutely, yeah.
And yeah, if these things were limited by like is the roof able to hold up to, our 20-year snow load? Is it,
Yeah.
These things are totally fine, and
Yeah.
we're not looking to live in a dump.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry, just to your question as well, the provincial bulletin that was released goes over some of those things that municipalities should consider in terms of safety.
Mhm.
And I'd be happy to share some examples of what is generally required as well.
Right. I do have a question of staff, if that's okay. I am going to give full disclosure because I've actually stated this in another meeting where we talked about deconstruction and all of that I lived in a Nickel Brothers house for many years in my childhood. And it actually was a big celebration in the neighborhood when the house was brought onto our street, and that was from densification in Vancouver many, many moons ago. So my question to staff is, I know we don't decide on this today, but in terms of what would council need to prepare some kind of motion to explore this for a future meeting, or how would we proceed if council did want to have staff look at the options and all of that? And, in terms of workload and work plan and all those things.
Mr. Garbutt?
Thanks. Thank you through the mayor, to Councillor Warren. Council directing us to undertake a staff report to look at the issue would be appropriate. The reason why we have standards is based on a variety of interconnected policies, construction, all those other components are there, but we also have standards on building code compliance. There's a whole bunch of issues related to this. And many communities, I really appreciate the work that's been done, that highlighting those. There are some also very contrasting policies about moved on buildings in central Vancouver Island, particularly south in the ocean side. And I'm aware none of those are listed here. So we will absolutely take council's direction to look at this. We do know that we have a housing crisis. We have some standards that we need to meet, and I think there's some process there. And staff would have to come back to the report.
Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Moran, and Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for coming here with this feedback. I think as policymakers, there are times where one experiences unintended consequences, or what begins with good intentions ends up preventing things from happening that were not foreseen. So I really appreciate the time that you've taken and the patience of your son in waiting while you do this. It's always nice to have kids in the chamber, just lightens things. I wanted to ask Cassidy, you were saying that you had questions about the 15-year limit. Are you aware of any particular age limits that exist in other jurisdictions that you believe to be kind of valid? And I guess the second follow-up to that question would be, are you aware of any safety hazards that have occurred where older homes have been moved?
I'm not aware of any age limitations in other jurisdictions, and I'm not aware of any safety issues that have been presented by homes moved through a BC Structural Moving Association mover. I'm going to be honest, I'm less educated about people that aren't certified through the BCSMA, because we are, and everyone that we work with is, but I'm not aware of any safety restrictions on that. Again, like all of our homes are, and they have an engineer's report, they have a structural report, they have a hazmat report. If abatement is required, abatement is done ahead of time. They're all WCB certified. So I know that our homes and the homes of all the contractors that we're familiar with that do similar work, they all have those requirements, and the homes are very sturdy and sound and safe.
Okay, and I imagine you have every interest in protecting your own reputation as someone who moves houses and produces safe homes in new locations for people. And obviously Jessica and Paul are interested in a home that's safe for their community. So
Absolutely.
we don't respond on the evening, but certainly I think there'll be some questions about how we might be able to improve upon policy. And again, it's always appreciated to get feedback. People in the community are experts on the impacts of the bylaws that we create. So we appreciate responses. Anyway, thanks for your time today.
Councillor,
Yeah,
Right.
that's pretty, yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor Cole Hamilton, for articulating everybody's questions and thoughts. It's much appreciated. And as I mentioned before, this will be coming back to council. And I think, again, learning about these unintended consequences and really what the options and implications are going forward is something that our council's certainly interested in. And so certainly keep abreast of what's happening. And if any point in time you want to follow up, you can always contact the city, and I have meet the mayor appointments every week that you can come in and meet as well if you want to get an update or anything like that. So,
Sorry, can I just follow up to that?
sure.
I did want to mention, we, like Nickel Bros, we own property in Courtenay. So as a business, like a local business that was affected by the bylaw change, we were a little bit startled that there didn't seem to be any discussion about it that we could find in the minutes, and there was no outreach or anything about like how that would affect the industry, how it could affect our clients that are local.
Mhm.
And I think if there were to be a bylaw change, we would appreciate as a local business being able to have more of a voice in that, or even just be able to review it ahead of time so that we can be a little bit more agile, I guess, in coping with that with people that we have already looking for homes in the jurisdiction. And also, being able to alert our partners at the BCSMA that that's happening so that they have a heads up, and would be nice moving forward.
Absolutely. No, totally appreciate it. And again, sometimes unintended consequences can kind of wrap around. But I think the fact that you've come as a delegation, you've presented quite well today. It's certainly going to be top of mind for council, and we expect to get some feedback from staff and then kind of figure out a path forward. So, all right. Oh.
Can I just say thank you? We realize it's a bit more work to administer something that's a bit more nuanced than what currently is, but we think it's well worth it.
Thank you. And again, thanks for bringing the young in. It always makes things a little bit more lively here. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, drop them off every other Wednesday, and yeah. All right. All right. Well, thanks very much for that. And we'll move into our City of Courtenay 2023 annual report, and I'll pass it over to Mr. Garbett. Unfortunately not. We do have a delegation process, so you can contact City Hall and request to be a delegation, or as I mentioned before, you can contact the city and set up a meeting with myself as well. And that's probably your best path forward. Just unfortunately, yeah, that's a bit of the process. But we'll move back to our annual report, and I'll pass it over to Mr. Garbett.
Thanks through the mayor to council. It's our pleasure to have our annual report in front of you. Ms. Gio, I think will make some statements about the bylaw. I just wanted to kick off and just talk about how proud we are of all the work that happens in our team, which is this council table, and our staff that are so forward facing, and the community we work with. We have worked extremely diligently. We're in our recovery mode, out of COVID still, and the amount of things that are accomplished on both a daily basis and on our strategic priorities is really inspirational. So I just wanted to pass my thanks on both to council for helping us and giving us that assistance and direction, and to the staff that executed your direction. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Gio.
Thank you through the city manager to mayor and council. Feels like I was just here introducing this report last year, so time flies, and it's always amazing to review the finished report and look at all the amazing work that happened over the previous year. Some of the things that we talked about quite openly and broadly, and other little stories that maybe people maybe not have heard about. So it's a great chance to highlight those good news stories as well. So the province of BC community charter requires that all municipalities in BC produce an annual report every year by June 30th. So in the 2023 annual report, there was many major projects highlighted, including the new strategic priorities that the city manager mentioned, the construction of the Dingwall Steps project, which was ongoing throughout much of the year. We installed air quality monitors on city buildings and launched an air quality campaign to educate the public about the impacts of wood smoke. Staff worked on a Parks and Recreation Master Plan implementation strategy. There was progress on a draft aquatic services strategy. As everybody knows, we launched the organics program and increased our waste diversion last year. There was a resident survey, Your Courtenay, Your Voice. There was the Strengthening Communities Grant Administration, the Strategic Cultural Plan, the Bylaws Compliance Policy and Strategic Plan, and new, something I'm really excited about is new graphic standards and progress on our communication strategy. So all of those things happened last year. The report also includes a lot of data, many data points over a 4-year period to show progress, and actually 5-year period, I should say, and a year-over-year comparisons and various other metrics. With the adoption of Council's new strategic priorities last year, the annual report was updated to reflect those new priorities as well as the updated branding. We posted the annual report on the city website and promoted it on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, as well as statutory advertising in the local paper and news releases in the local paper as well. The annual report was prepared in-house by communication staff with support from all departments. And thank you so much. I'll turn this back to the city manager now.
Thanks so much. And is that just to the city manager in case there's questions?
Yes, sure. Any comments? Yes.
All right, fair enough. All right, so with that, are there any questions or comments that staff would have? I'll just start by saying, one, I'm always inspired by the work that is being done by our staff. I think our council tends to work well together, but really the rubber hits the road with staff actually operationalizing the direction that we give, which hopefully is relatively clear. And then, of course, the report itself is really well laid out and just looks really awesome. And again, just easy to get the information out of, which is quite important. And I think we talked about that even last year about, even doing some Facebook posts, which I believe Councillor Morin may have already started. My phone kept saying I was tagged in something. So I'll give a pre-thanks to Councillor Morin for that. But with that, I'll pass it over to Councillor Morin.
Great, thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I love to highlight these kind of things, and I appreciate all the work that goes into the annual report from obviously Anne's department, but also all the other departments that contribute to the report. So I guess I was curious about the process in terms of public feedback. I'm assuming we've reached the deadline now for public feedback to come in. And I know we have had a couple emails. My question is, have we had other feedback other than the couple emails that we received today? And how do we manage that feedback? Because I'd be happy to outline some of that feedback and ask for some clarification, but I don't want to go through all that if there's a process to do that. Some of the feedback is actually seems like it would be fairly simple to add to the report. So thanks.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor Morin. So the written feedback that was provided, I've circulated to legislative services staff, and we'll follow up with those questions. I agree, they're straightforward. Some, two of the written, there was some conceptual and those type of comments, but there are some detailed questions, and we'll follow up as staff, just like we do regularly when we get inquiries.
Sorry, just so when you say you'll follow up, if there was to be something added to the report, then that would come back to council or?
Through the mayor, we know if council wants to direct us to do that, we have a statutory deadline.
Okay.
The questions that were asked, I think, are some clarification that I've seen, but we wouldn't be in a position to amend the report and meet our statutory deadlines at this point. And if staff and communications or legislative services had some comments, I'd be happy to hear that, but I think we're moving through that.
Okay, and I'll let our Ms. McConnell go ahead, but I may end up asking a couple questions related to that feedback, just so that we get that on the record and perhaps others will as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Moore. Ms. O'Connell.
Thanks, Councilor Moran. So one of the letters that came in a little bit earlier, I've already actioned and have reached out to the various directors in order to provide them with answers to most of their questions. Some were not questions at all, but just general statements that wouldn't warrant a response. The questions regarding or the recommendations regarding bylaw service metrics. I would be happy in next year's report in advance of that to kind of clarify why some of those metrics wouldn't necessarily be metrics we would report out based on the bylaw policy. For example, we prioritize things like avoiding penalties through voluntary compliance. So rather than saying how many tickets we handed out, a metric that would be more appropriate based on our policy would be something along the lines of the number of times we reached bylaw compliance voluntarily without having to issue a ticket. So some of the components are it's more along the lines of what aligns with the policy versus what may be of interest to other people. This doesn't prevent folks from asking for those types of information. And in bylaw in particular, we do include those stats when we do annual updates around our data. I really do appreciate comments from one of the residents regarding the addition of captions to all of the photos. Although it won't be possible to do that this year, I think that is a very reasonable and very much appreciated and something we will definitely implement for next year's annual report. And then for anyone where there was a question or an inquiry, we'll either have to put them through, if it's publicly available, we can respond directly. If it's something that's not publicly available, then they'll be advised to go through the FOI process. But I have all three well in hand.
Thanks, Ms. O'Connell. I appreciate that. And really that articulation that if something hasn't already been actioned, there are processes either to make things better for next year, which again, I think staff, just looking at how even our annual report has grown over the last 10 or so years, I guess, that I've been looking at it, there is certainly an improvement every year. So really happy to hear that. That being said, I don't see there's any further comment. Oh, maybe there is. Councillor Moore.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, when I look at the emails, most of them are comments about procedure and policy that our staff is responding to, so that's great. But there was the comment about housing starts, noting that they were in the report, they were down significantly from last year. And I think that there is some merit to some sort of context with that. And it doesn't sound like well, I guess it sounds like with direction, we could add something like that. But I guess I'd like to turn to staff to see whether there would be merit in some kind of context statement that the suggestion is a short explanation be added regarding what that discrepancy might be about. Because it sort of tells a story without people understanding what that's, without the clarification. Thanks.
Ms. Wade.
Thank you through the mayor to Councillor Warren. Thank you for that question. And I acknowledge about the story and the trend analysis, and it's something that I'm working with Ms. O'Connell and Ms. Gallo on as far as for next year and making improvements on the trend analysis and the explanation. So yes, we're looking into that for next year. I don't know if Ms. O'Connell wants to add anything more.
Ms. O'Connell.
I am a metric geek and I guard the metrics that we present in our annual report quite significantly. There is a difference between metrics that are of interest versus metrics that are based on data. So although I suspect some of what the resident may have suggested would be true, we actually can't point to that directly because we're not asking people why they chose not to apply or why they're not doing something this year. So we're working with development services to identify metrics that we can repeat over and over and we can directly attribute cause and effect to. That way, the story is something that is founded on the data as opposed to general speculation. So we are definitely working on improving that, and you will notice some improvements already in this year's annual report over last.
Okay, one last thing. I thought that we had talked about this discrepancy before and that we did have some information, and that was maybe that those numbers are gonna come in 2024 because they were later in the, I thought we'd had a conversation, but maybe not. Okay. Maybe there is no explanation then that we can report on.
Would you like to
Thanks.
make a motion?
No.
Would somebody like to make a motion? Thanks, Councillor Frisch.
I got a lot to say first, though. No, this is a great report, and I mean, inevitably, when we have 30,000 people in the in Courtenay, you know, someone's going to wish they had a little more information. It sounds like it's available if they simply contact the city. And with that, I'll move that council approve the City of Courtenay 2023 annual report.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. We had a fulsome conversation. So all those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thanks very much for that. Next, we'll get into development services, and we have development variance permit 2405, 2599 Copperfield Road, and maybe I'll pass it over to Ms. Wade.
Thank you, council. This is a straightforward development variance permit to vary a side yard setback on both sides of the building from 3.5 to 2.5 to allow for a addition to the rear of the building. What this building came into the city in 2002, it came in prior to the current zoning bylaw 2007 and was rezoned and had some legal non-conforming siting. And with this development variance permit from 3.5 to 2.5, that'll bring that all into compliance. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks so much. Any questions from council? Councillor Frisch.
No question, Mayor. It does look really straightforward to me, and seeing as there's no questions, I'll go ahead and move that council vary section 8.1.15 subsection 3 of the zoning bylaw number 2500/2007. And that council approved development variance permit number 2405. And that council direct the Director of Development Services to issue development variance permit number 2405.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further comments before we vote? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that passes unanimously, and we will move on to the Financial Information Act, Statement of Financial Information. I believe maybe I'll pass it over to Mr. Behrman.
Thanks to the Mayor and Council. This is a statutory requirement. We have our Statement of Financial Information for the 2023 year. The staff report in front of you gives an overview of our accounts, that information, and provides information on the activities of the corporation through that period. Mr. Langemeyer is here for any questions if council has them. And we offer it for your consideration and receipt.
Thanks very much for that. And I see that Councillor Morin.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm just trying to pull it up, but I did see there was a bit of a discrepancy between my salary and the rest of councils, and I was just wanting some clarification on that because I would have thought that they would have been all the same. I know there's acting mayor in there, which not everybody is receiving, but I'm trying to find our chart here. It's a difference of about $300 or something. I got paid less, so that doesn't make sense. No, if that was the case, I'd be like twice as much.
And I think you have to declare your tips too, don't you, as a Mr. Langemeyer?
It's about $300
The difference is likely due to the timing of the acting mayor pay, because that was a policy
okay.
that came in partway through the year.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Langemeyer, for that clarification. And I don't see any further ones. Again, it's a bit administrative. Oh, Councillor Frisch. Yeah.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll move that council approve the City of Courtenay Statement of Financial Information for the year ended December 31st, 2023.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. And again, I don't think there's too many questions on this other than that clarification. So that being said, all those in favor? And that passes unanimously. And we'll move into the RCMP municipal policing contract approval in principle. And I'll pass it over to Mr. Garvin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through to council. We've received our correspondence from the RCMP that was forward facing. Staff have engaged with the RCMP to clarify that we are currently in a position to support the current complement of staffing. We understand that there are some desires with the RCMP. Our new detachment commander is starting in the first week of July, I guess in a few days. I pass that information on to council. During the selection process, we talked about engagement with councils on that, and we anticipate more work being done with the RCMP to do forward planning on a number of items, including staffing. This recommendation is in front of council to approve in principle an expenditure cap for the 25-26 municipal policing contract. And Mr. Langmeyer is here as well as myself for questions if you have them.
Thanks very much for that information. And Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Mayor. So I just had two questions. One is there's a reference to the RCMP reserve, and I was just wondering if you could tell us what the balance of that reserve is, if you happen to have that information handy.
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but it is actually found in the statement of financial information in the financial statements.
Oh, okay. I'll use the find function and search that myself. The other question I had was it said in the report that vacancy pattern is expected to reduce in future, down from the current 4 to 5. And I just wanted to know what the basis was for that expectation, and how much do we expect it to reduce by in future?
So I can speak to this one. When I prepare this report, I talked with RCMP, and the trend over the last couple of years, part of where the vacancies increased was due to COVID and the number of recruits going through the boot camp process or for depot.
Mm-hmm.
And so that shrank the number of available people to come in and fill. So with depot reopening, there's an anticipation that there'll be more staff to fill vacancies that have occurred. And it's the RCMP's goal to hit the approved number of FTE there. And so that's really why I'm expecting those numbers to increase. You know, year over year, they've said this is going to increase, but they're, you know, we're starting to see that tail end of it. To answer your other question about the reserve, I just found it. The police contingency reserve sits at just under $1.3 million.
Okay, great. Thanks for both answers. Appreciate that.
And Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thanks, Mayor. That was one of my questions, and I mean, it's kind of all over the news, and there was a RCMP report on the issues that the RCMP are encountering with recruiting. So I'm not entirely sure that statement is something that I've seen reflected at the federal level, at least, but let's stay hoping that that more people join this as a service and a calling in their life. I've got two questions for clarity, but I'll pass if there's someone else that has their mic on. The first one, just for clarification, in the staff report, we're being asked to, the resolution on the table that's being proposed is an approval in principle for around 9 million for the 25-26 contract year. And that's for 31.4 funded by Courtenay. And so I'm just wanting to be super clear, our financial plan that was approved a few months ago had a different amount than 31.4 as a result of the vacancy numbers that we've just discussed. And so I'm just not quite clear. We're talking about approval in principle, which would go to the RCMP federally for 31.4, but we've actually not currently funded 31.4 based on the vacancies that we've seen year over year. Is that a correct logic? I'm just trying to understand how we've approved something with data that we have, which is that we don't actually ever get up to 31.4, but we're asking to pre-approve 31.4 for the coming year.
So the request before you is going to the feds to say, hey, the city of Courtenay wants to have 31.4. That is our maximum authorized strength. That is what this letter is doing. Through our own internal budgeting and financial planning process, the city chooses how we want to pay for those 31.4. Two separate processes you have to think of. One is, this is our maximum. We're not going to go over. We can go under if they can't have the staff to show up. How we pay for it and how we tax for it is what we do in the financial planning process. So with the information that vacancies will probably be decreasing, the recommendation will be to fund closer to that 31.4 and tax residents for those services because we expect to have, instead of taxing to the approval in principle and not having those resources show up and then having running a surplus in the RCMP service.
I have a follow-up to that.
Mhm.
And so when we send a message to Ottawa through an approval in principle indicating that we'll fund up to 31.4 members for an extended period of time, I think the last contract was 10 years, 20 years. What is the repercussions if we in fact don't, like we did this year, fund that total amount or unwilling, yet we've committed to that? Like, is there any kind of reproach that the RCMP or Ottawa can come back to us and say, well, you've actually agreed to 31.4, even though you haven't taxed this year. We don't care what you've taxed for or not. You still owe us this much if we're able to get to that point. Is that a situation that can happen if we're in fact committing to that and we under tax because we know that that hasn't happened and likely won't happen for a while?
That is correct. So in the event that we get the full FTE showing up, 31.4, we'll get the bill for 31.4 and we'll pay it.
Okay.
And it's because council gave the approval in principle that this is the strength we want. And so this is where we have the balance between, appropriately taxing our residents and then balancing what kind of services do we expect to actually receive from the RCMP. And it is challenging and it is a balancing act.
And Mr. Garber's got a comment as well.
Thank you through the mayor, and I appreciate the question from Councillor Jolicoeur. We had discussions related to policing both at the budget and through our strategic planning exercise. We're in a bit of a holding pattern without a permanent detachment commander that's going to come. It's up to council, and we will facilitate discussions to decide if we longer term agree with 31.4 or we want to reduce that. And that's an engagement that we weren't really able to have based on the current circumstances. The trends are showing that we aren't filling those, but the ask from the RCMP is based on the community parties, the activity levels, et cetera. And so that's the conversation that we need to have with the detachment commander on the policing process and portfolio, I guess, a lot of P's in there, and what works for Courtenay. And we are in a shared detachment, which has to provide service to five communities, including our Indigenous community. And that's the conversation that we need to have on a go-forward basis. And council would make that determination if we wanted to change what we agree. We just haven't had that conversation. The 31.4 is a standing, somewhat static level that's been in place, and my apologies, I don't know exactly how long we've had 31.4, but we have had population growth and those things, and so we haven't agreed to increase that complement, nor have we adjusted that complement yet, and that requires some specific engagement that we hopefully have planned with the incoming detachment commander.
Yeah, and then sort of one of the other sides of it is just if, let's say, there was a huge amount of cadets or whatever in the hopper, that information would flow to us to give us time to prepare for those numbers to go up as well, if they ever did. It's not likely that, we'd have 3 or 4 people just show up without any announcement, because the amount that basically we are underrepresented with the members that they supply us is pretty average across the province and really across the country. So we're there'd have to be a whole bunch to happen to a whole bunch of communities. I don't think they would just send any excess people here. So, yeah, if that makes sense. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Maybe just a bit of insight as well. We've been staring at these numbers for 10 years, you and I. They've never made the amount. I think it was at maybe 29 or 30 when we started. And this contract is only for 1 year. So it's, it doesn't matter for next year. We can change it. I think realistically, if we wanted to get 31 members, we would just move the bar up to 33 or 34, and then we'd find that we get there. But we've never really decided to do that. I know we did raise it in the last 10 years by two officers, I believe. So yeah, and we also have a healthy reserve that would help us. Although we budget for it, so we've got the money. So this looks great. Do you want me to move it?
All right, Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thanks, Mayor. In the attachment, this is really helpful to see there. I'm assuming this comes from the RCMP. This is what's been submitted. On table 1, page 1 of the attachment, there are some note sections with some details on some of the increases, which we've heard from the representatives of the detachment that this would be coming, including the body worn cameras. There are a few items here that budget lines that have seen a significant, in the 20s to, 30% increases that I get curious and, beyond this document, were we provided any details around, the rationale, life expectancy of some of these assets? I think when we go through our budget process, we hear from the directors quite clearly around where the increases of costs are, and some analysis around that are really helpful in our consideration when budget requests come forward. And in reviewing the budget that's been sent from the RCMP, I definitely had a lot more questions around some of this. And so I'm wondering if that's a practice that is provided to staff around the details of some of these increases. And if it's not, if it's between now and when we send the final for 25-26, which I imagine we'll have some opportunity to workshop it, that we can gather some further details of some of these requests and increases. Is that something that we either have now or that we can get before we send the final?
I didn't ask further details on the information provided. If council has further questions, they can be circulated and we can work on it, because this is the approval in principle. And then in April, we see the final approval letter come through.
Okay. Thanks.
And then if we're meeting with the new officer in charge and having regular meetings with the RCMP, these can be things that we talk about, not necessarily just once a year or twice a year, but when we're having those bigger discussions. An example might be the bicycle police, where we had recommended that they use e-bikes. And so they trialed that and have actually expanded those e-bikes because it was so successful. So but of course there's a cost to e-bikes as well, right? But those kinds of conversations can be ongoing. So we're not feeling like we have to wait quite a long time before we have these conversations, especially because it's fresh in our minds right now. All right. Any further clarifying questions? I don't see any more. All right. If somebody would like to move.
I'll do it.
Councillor Frisch.
I'll move that council provide approval in principle for the expenditure cap of $9,015,110 for the 2025-26 municipal policing contract.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further questions or comments? Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I guess it was really helpful to hear from staff around our process moving forward. I do find it a little challenging to not necessarily have the details that would typically come with such a request that I would like to see, that we've seen in other departments of the city. An agreement in principle, I think, sends a message. And I guess I would just share my concerns around that if between now and the final decision that there is a change, that we might have to deal with some potential consequences of that from our colleagues over at the RCMP. And given that this is the first time that I'm participating in this, I don't know how common that is in municipalities, if they're changing the approval in principle from the final decision. And then I guess I would just like to hear from staff what we can expect as a process moving forward. I know that we've had a change in leadership here locally at the detachment around having a fulsome conversation as it relates to our community priorities. And some of the things, when I see our community priorities, I'm not quite clear why some of these expenses are here, given where we've been advising the RCMP to focus their efforts. Some of the things that are listed here, I don't quite understand how they, can be rectified with what we've identified as our priorities. But I would like to hear from staff what that process could look like so we can have a fulsome conversation with our colleagues.
Ms. Courtenay.
Thank you through the mayor to Councillor Jolicoeur. Specifics on what the conversation would look like requires us to be engaged with the RCMP. Not having had that specific conversation with the new detachment commander, I couldn't advise, but council, I think, has identified some clear items, and perhaps we could add as an agenda item before that a discussion on what we would like to raise. We have had informal meetings with the RCMP, with the acting island superintendent and the acting detachment commander, and I would assume that would be similar conversations. And then we also have layered in costs and priorities inside our shared detachment, as well as the costs and obligations in the provincial policing agreement. But that remains to be determined, and clear message from council would assist me in, technically the mayor, who the detachment commander reports to in our conversations.
And I think, another component to this conversation is a request for like an elected officials forum around RCMP that would actually bring together all of the municipalities as well. That was something that was forwarded to the CDRD, but they don't have a service for it. So it is something that the city is looking to help facilitate, but just waiting for the new officer in charge to sort of get his legs underneath him. But that's something that we'd be probably bringing forward as a community event for elected officials. So which, a component of it is most likely going to include some of this, strength questions. All right. And with that, I think we've had a pretty fulsome conversation. Appreciate the questions. So I believe we've got a motion on the floor. So all those in favor? And that passes. Any against? Sorry, I don't want to assume. All right. So that passes unanimously. And we'll move into external reports and correspondence. We have a letter from Millard Piercy Watershed. And this is the recommendation from staff, but Councillor Morin.
I'm just thinking this is relatively straightforward, and I'm okay to move the recommendation. Yeah, just that council permit the Millard Piercy Watershed stewards to erect 10 tents on city property located on the green space between the parking lot on Mansfield Drive and the Courtenay Riverway Heritage Walk on September 22nd, 2024, Family Watershed Day, to present information on topics related to the health of watersheds and their inhabitants. I think it's a great, I think it's a great event, and it sounds like there's no concerns from staff, so I'm happy to support that.
So it's been moved and seconded, and again, I think the conversation is not to mark a particular organization with specific habits, but we would expect and are pretty confident that the area will probably be in better condition after the event than before. So they are a really great community organization. So with that, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously, and we'll move into bylaws. So we have the OCP Amendment 3141. Ms. Wade.
Thank you. The report that is before you is for the consideration of third reading for the OCP land use designation amendment. This amendment, the purpose of it is to designate our municipally owned land to be in conformance with the surrounding lands for urban corridor. There was a public hearing held on June 19th. There were two residents in opposition. We have now fulfilled our obligations under the legislative requirements. And the bylaw is before council now for consideration of third reading. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much. And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Well, we just had the public hearing for this OCP amendment. And I'll just point out that the presenters did come forward with some very interesting perspective on development in this area. But in my understanding, what we're doing today is just bringing this into compliance with our OCP, and that any future development in the area will go through a separate process that we can consider at that time. So I'm happy to support this.
So thanks for that. I don't see any other comments. So if somebody'd like to move it, Councillor Frisch.
I'll move that council give third reading to the official community plan amendment bylaw number 3141.
All right, been moved and seconded. Not seeing any further questions or comments. All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And we'll move into council reports. And we'll start with Councillor Cole-Hamilton, Councillor Frisch. Councillor Hillian is not here. Councillor Jolicoeur.
Thanks, Mayor. It was really nice to be back in the community after a few weeks away, and I was able to celebrate my return to the community by attending the Comox First Nations community celebrations for National Indigenous Peoples Day, and I know many of my colleagues were also there. But I did want to just share the good news that there was folks from across the community participating. There was games for kids. There's a lot of musical acts that went, I think, an hour and a half over when it was planned to stop with a Juno winner there, bringing us to the closing. And we also got to hear from the Kumagway Cultural Society around some of the historical aspects of the land that we were celebrating on, but also some of the historical context of the different groups that make up the modern Comox First Nation. We also heard from the elected councillors and got to witness the invitation of all the hereditary chiefs in attendance coming on stage to welcome the community on a very celebratory day. So I just wanted to thank the Comox First Nation and the organizers for a really successful first annual event at that location, and happy to continue to support it going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Jolicoeur. And Councillor Moore.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I really enjoyed that day as well. I just wanted to briefly report on attending the regular meeting with folks who are unhoused or have been unhoused in the community, which happens almost every week. And some of us are going to try to kind of rotate through, and it's a good opportunity to hear from folks who don't have often the means to be able to connect with council as regularly because of obviously not having having barriers to that communication. So the meeting's really about the coordinator of the Homelessness Coalition facilitates it, and it's mainly for their purposes, but I just sat in mostly as an observer and just clarified some things and provided a bit of info. So I think that's a good thing to attend. I did want to point out, because of the myth that we hear, and I actually had someone message me this week asking if I knew whether people were bused into the community. And this is an old friend of mine, and I just provided all the information that I had on that myth that circulates in almost every community. But I wanted to give some context. The start of the meeting that we had that happened was actually asking folks how long they'd lived in the community. And it was interesting. There was one person who lived in the community for just shy of how long I've been here, so 60 years. And most of the folks who weighed in, well, I think everybody weighed in, It was really upwards between 10+ years, and I think there was only one person in attendance who'd been here less than 2 years. So I just really wanted to, there was, I believe, 35 people there. I mean, that doesn't reflect everybody who's unhoused, but I think it's pretty obvious that many people have been here a long time. And I think sometimes when we see new faces, it's because maybe people are newly unhoused. They're people who have had housing, who have had jobs, all those things, and now don't. So I just wanted to, provide that context publicly, because it is something that can be harmful to people to spread that story around. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Councillor Morin, and yeah, I had a good chat with Dana today as a follow-up to her request for having sort of quarterly updates from leaders from across the community, and she said your presence there was great, and having councillors, mayors, directors from various elected bodies attend these meetings does help them feel less dehumanized, as again, talking about the buses and stuff like that. And and Dana's going to send out an email that sort of articulates where we always have an open door policy to visit these meetings, and then coming up with sort of an articulated list of things that we can kind of update them on a regular basis as well, both here, the regional district, town of Comox, and village of Cumberland. So looking forward to that. Getting back to my council report, again, Indigenous Peoples Day, have to give a shout out. Jesse Morin did a fantastic job articulating that cultural topography, as well as Christy, who gave, Jesse started kind of 10,000 years to about 200 years ago. And then Christy did the kind of Indian Act to where we are today. And just really the message of hope, and really how, especially I think as local leaders, how we have the ability to really move the dial, and have been doing that. So really appreciate the whole day. Was again, there's lots of different events at different times across town, and they're all fantastic. Also attended the Give Hope Wings event that happened at the air park. And this was just raising awareness and fundraising for private pilots that fly people to medical appointments outside of their areas from remote locations, so they can get cancer treatments, et cetera, that they're not able to get in their local communities. And with that, I think that answers that. And then we can go in camera if somebody would like to move that. Thanks, Councillor Colham, and I put your light on. I do appreciate the effort. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously, and we will now move in camera. Thank you.